Late April, 430 BC. Just outside the gates of Athens, dawn. The smoke from 100 burning farms rises against a bruised purple sky. Spartan king Archidamus has done exactly what everyone feared. He has marched his hoplites through the isthmus, and now the red cloaks of the enemy are less than a day's walk from the Acropolis. Inside the city, a man in a dusty wool tunic slams his fist against a neighbor's door. His name does not matter. He is one of 40,000 farmers who just watched their olive trees turn to ash. His hands still smell like the fire he lit himself. A hard thing, burning your own harvest so the enemy can't take it. That was Pericles' order. Scorch the earth. Retreat behind the walls. Let Sparta grind its teeth on stone. The decision has been made. Every single person living in the countryside of Attica must abandon their ancestral homes and cram themselves into the narrow alleyways between the long walls. The farmer's wife clutches a wooden box of dried figs. His son carries a cage with 3 panicked chickens. They join the river of humanity shuffling toward the Dippolon gate. Here is the immediate consequence. Athens was never built for this. Its population normally hovers near 150,000. Within 72 hours, that number doubles. Refugees sleep in the towers of the fortifications, in the porches of temples, even inside the hollow bronze statue of Athena Promachos. The wells run low by midday. The latrines overflow by the second day. A potter named Aristian, whose name Thucydides would later record, finds himself sleeping on a bed of broken roof tiles next to a stranger who has dysentery. He pulls his cloak over his nose, but the smell of unwashed bodies and open sewage is already permanent. Pericles watches all of this from the Nix hill. He is not a young man anymore. His helmet is polished, but his eyes are hollow. He knows the gamble. Sparta has the best infantry in Greece. On open ground, Athens would be slaughtered. But inside these walls, with the long roads connecting the city to the fortified port of Piraeus, Athens can survive indefinitely. The navy still controls the sea. Grain ships from Egypt and the Black Sea will keep coming. The plan is clean. The plan is logical. But here is the complication that no one in the War Council predicted. The refugees are not just bringing their chickens and their grandmothers. They are bringing disease. The port of Piraeus has been receiving merchant vessels from Egypt, from Libya, from the distant shores of the Hellespont. One of those ships, docking in the 3rd week of May, carries something invisible in the hold of a grain freighter. A rat dying of thirst. A sailor with red-rimmed eyes who wipes his mouth with the back of his hand and tells his captain he feels a little warm. By the time the grain is unloaded and the sailor collapses on the dock, the fever has already walked into the city, on the feet of 100 unsuspecting mules. The first case appears in the Kerameikos district, the potter's quarter. A woman who unloaded the Egyptian grain wakes up with a headache, so violent she cannot lift her head from the straw mattress. Within 6 hours, her sons find her burning to the touch, her skin breaking out in a rash of small red blisters. They carry her to the temple of Asclepius, but the priest takes one look and tells them to keep her in the house. Do not look away from this moment. This is where the Athenian strategy, so brilliant on paper, becomes a death trap. The walls that were supposed to save them are now the bars of a cage. Mid-June, 430 BC, the Agora of Athens, noon. The heat is biblical. Not a breath of wind moves the sacred olive tree on the Acropolis. And inside the city, the sickness no longer hides in the potter's quarter. It has spread to the Nix, where the assembly meets. It has climbed the marble steps of the Parthenon. It has crawled into the naval arsenals of Piraeus, where rowers sleep stacked 3 high on wooden benches. A young hoplite named Euphilitus, no famous leader, just a 17-year-old, who lied about his age to fight, wakes up, vomiting bile over the side of his cot. His captain tells him to drink water and walk it off. By sunset, Euphilitus cannot remember his mother's face. The fever has burned through whatever held his mind together. Here is the concrete decision that changes everything. Pericles orders the gate sealed. No one leaves, no one enters. It is a quarantine, though they do not have that word yet. The Spartan army has withdrawn for the summer. Their campaign season is short. Their hoplites want to go home to harvest their own grain. For a moment, it seems like the walls have worked. The enemy is gone. But the disease is not. The immediate consequence is a nightmare of logistics. The dead accumulate faster than the living can bury them. The Athenian custom requires a full day of mourning, a procession, a funeral oration. But by the 3rd week of June, the bodies lie in the streets for 2 days before anyone touches them. Thucydides, who will survive to write the history of this horror, describes men and women dying, like sheep in the fountains, where they went to get water. A man carrying his dead brother stumbles, drops the body, and lies down next to him, dead before the brother's body cools. Give yourself one small human moment. There is an old priestess at the temple of Hera. Her name is not recorded, but her action is. Every morning, she walks through the neighborhood with a clay cup of wine and a clean rag. She cannot cure anyone. She knows this. But she wipes the faces of the dying and whispers the names of their ancestors, so they do not die alone. On the 23rd day, she finds no one left alive in 3 houses in a row. She sits on the curb, puts her head in her hands, and does not get up again. The complication now is not just death, it is the collapse of trust. The plague does not discriminate, but the living do. Rumors spread that the Spartans poisoned the wells. Then rumors that the gods are punishing Athens for the war. Then the ugliest rumor, that the refugees from the countryside brought the sickness because they are unclean. Poor, not proper Athenians. Neighbors stop speaking to neighbors. A man will watch his own cousin die of thirst because he refuses to share a cup. And here is the moral shock that breaks Athenian society. The wealthy begin hiding. The aristocrats who voted for the war, who cheered Pericles' strategy, who own the triremes, they retreat to their inner courtyards and lock the gates. A merchant named Lyson, known for his donations to the navy, is seen throwing a dying servant into the street, so the servant does not contaminate the household. The democracy that Athens prides itself on? It curdles into selfishness overnight. Then the fever reaches the man himself. Pericles, the first citizen, the architect of the Golden Age, he wakes up with a slight headache on a morning in late July. He ignores it. He has a speech to write, a funeral oration, for the first wave of soldiers who died of the plague, not Spartan spears. He stands at the podium, opens his mouth, and a dry cough racks his body, so violently that the papyrus scroll falls from his hand. The assembly goes silent. They watch their leader grip the marble rail, his face flushed red, then white, then gray. He finishes the speech. It will become famous. But everyone in that crowd knows the truth. The plague does not retreat. Late August, 430 BC. Pericles' private residence, Athens, dusk. The room smells of vinegar and burnt herbs. That is the latest treatment, fumigation. A slave waves a smoking bronze censer over the bed. But the smoke does nothing except make the general cough harder. Pericles lies on a simple wooden frame, his body reduced to something his friends barely recognize. The man who once commanded the Aegean Sea, who faced down the Spartan army without flinching, now weighs less than a boy. His skin is the color of wet ash. Open sores cover his thighs and groin, the famous ulcers that Thucydides would describe in clinical detail. His son Xanthippus stands by the door, but he does not enter. No one enters. The family has learned that the plague spreads through touch. So Pericles dies alone, except for a single slave who is already showing the first signs of fever herself. Here is the concrete action that reshapes the war. 2 weeks before he loses the ability to speak, Pericles summons his remaining generals to the courtyard. He cannot stand. They lower him onto a stone bench, his back against a cypress tree. His voice is a whisper, but his mind is still terrifyingly clear. He tells them 3 things. First, do not abandon the navy. Second, do not expand the war. Hold the walls, hold the sea, wait for Sparta to tire. Third, protect the city's grain supply at all costs. Then he asks for a cup of water. He drinks it. He closes his eyes. And for a long moment, the generals think he has already died. But he opens his eyes again and says something strange. No Athenian was ever buried in a finer grave than this city. The immediate consequence is a power vacuum. Pericles dies before dawn on a Tuesday. The official cause is plague of the bowels, but the real cause is exhaustion. He fought the fever for 40 days. Most men lasted 7. The news spreads through Athens like fire in dry brush. Women weep in the streets. A trireme crew in Piraeus refuses to launch because they say, the rudder has no hand. The Spartan army, hearing the news through a deserter, immediately marches back toward Attica with renewed aggression. They smell blood. But here is the complication that no historian likes to talk about. The democracy does not mourn for long. Within a week, the assembly is fighting over who replaces Pericles. A man named Cleon steps forward, a leather merchant, loud, brutal, and utterly convinced that Pericles was too cautious. He argues that Athens should stop hiding behind walls, attack Sparta directly, burn the Peloponnese, show no mercy. Another general, Nicias, argues the opposite. Stay the course. Pericles was right. The navy is everything. The debate turns ugly. Factions form. Friends who fought side by side at Samos now shout insults across the necks. And while the politicians argue, the plague continues its work. The death toll passes 25,000, then 30,000. The graveyards run out of space. The Athenians begin stacking bodies in mass. Graves, some have been found by modern archaeologists. Their bones jumbled together without grave goods, without names, without the dignity that Pericles promised them in his famous oration. One of those mass graves sits just outside the Dipylon Gate. A team of slaves digs a trench 40 feet long. They do not wrap the bodies. They do not say prayers. They simply drop each corpse into the earth, cover it with a thin layer of lime, and move to the next one. A boy of 14, too young to fight, too old to be ignored, holds a torch so the slaves can see. He watches the face of an old woman disappear under the white powder. She was his neighbor. He never learned her name. He vomits into the trench and keeps holding the torch, because there is no one else to hold it. This is the moment when Athens breaks. Not when the Spartans arrive, not when the walls fall, but when a teenage boy vomits into a mass grave and no one even looks at him. Winter, 429 BC, the long walls corridor, midnight. Snow falls on Athens for the first time in 7 years. The flakes drift through the gaps in the walls, through the holes in the roofs where no one bothered to make repairs, through the collapsed doorways of houses whose last occupant died alone. The city is silent, not the silence of peace, the silence of a graveyard. The plague has finally burned itself out, not because anyone stopped it, because it ran out of bodies. Modern historians argue about what it was: typhus, smallpox, Ebola, a hemorrhagic fever. But standing in the frozen streets of Athens, the diagnosis does not matter. What matters is what remains. Less than half the population, 40,000 dead, maybe more. The records are incomplete because the clerks died too. Here is the concrete decision that defines the aftermath. The assembly meets again. The survivors gather in the Nyx, shivering under their cloaks, their faces hollow and pale. Cleon stands on the speaker's platform and demands revenge. Attack Sparta. Burn the Peloponnese to nothing. Make them pay for every grave. The crowd roars its approval, not because Cleon is convincing, but because rage is easier than grief. But then a quiet voice speaks. It is a farmer, one of the refugees who survived the plague, who lost his wife and 3 children to the fever. He does not give a speech. He simply asks a question: what is left to attack with? The trireme crews are decimated. 2/3 of the rowers are dead or too weak to pull an oar. The hoplite regiments have lost their veterans. The treasury is drained from paying for mass graves and fumigation. And the moral fabric of the city, the trust, the discipline, the belief that Athens is different from the barbarians, that is gone too. The immediate consequence is not a dramatic battle or a famous last stand. It is something worse, a slow, grinding, humiliating decline. Athens will fight for another 25 years. They will win battles. They will build more walls. But the spark is gone. The plague did not just kill people. It killed the idea that Pericles had sold them, that Athenian intelligence, Athenian democracy, Athenian walls could conquer anything. The complication, the final twist that no one saw coming, is that Sparta does not win either. The Peloponnesian War will drag on until both sides are exhausted, until Persia has to step in to broker a peace, until the Greek world is so weakened that a new power from the north, Macedon, will walk in and take everything. Athens will never again rule the Aegean. The Golden Age ends not with a Spartan torch, but with a fever. So here is the image to hold in your mind. Not a battle, not a speech, a single doorway in the Kerameikos district. The door is half open. Snow has drifted inside. A wool cloak lies crumpled on the threshold, dropped by someone who never came back to pick it up, and carved into the stone lintel, in small crooked letters, someone has written a single word: Tharse, courage. They wrote it for themselves. They wrote it for the dead. They wrote it for a city that would never be whole again.